Alright guys, it's time to talk about Tropical Storm Debby and its impacts to Florida and the southeastern United States and into portions of the northeastern US later this week. So starting off today, early this morning on August 4th, looking at the infrared satellite imagery, it's still a pretty lopsided storm. A lot of the convection it's on its eastern side. Now the storm has about only 50-mile-an-hour winds at the moment, and with the satellite imagery like this, where it looks pretty lopsided, I would not expect any rapid intensification today before landfall near the Big Bend of Florida later tonight. Even though we have very warm water temperatures, the amount of dry air being ingested on its western side and some wind shear is not helping it rapidly intensify today, and I think that will be the case. It'll be more of just a slow intensification up until landfall. And then looking at the visible satellite imagery, the center of the storm is located right about in here, and you can clearly see all of the convection is on its eastern side, so it's very lopsided at the moment still. And as long as this continues, I would not expect any rapid intensification today all the way to landfall. It'll be more of a, like I said, a gradual intensification up until landfall tonight. And with that being said, here is the official track from the National Hurricane Center as of 11 a.m. on August 4th. They have it landfalling to the east of Apalachicola as a Category 1 hurricane, and then moving into portions of southern Georgia. And then beyond that, it gets a little bit tricky because somewhere along the eastern Georgia coast and into the South Carolina coast or in the offshore waters, the storm is going to actually stall, maybe meander for a couple days or make a loop. The models are pretty all over the place as where exactly this could happen, whether it's over land or whether it's over water. But no matter what, it's going to stall somewhere near the Georgia, South Carolina coast early in the week. And that is going to cause huge amounts of rainfall for portions of Georgia and South Carolina. I'll show you the numbers later on. But we have a major flash flood risk for this area because of that. And then beyond that, it finally gets caught up into a trough, and then it gets pulled up the east coast towards the end of the week, and then offshore of the northeast coast going into next weekend. And so at the moment, we do have hurricane warnings up for the Big Bend area of Florida. That's the area in red right there. We got tropical storm warnings up for the entire western coast of the Florida Peninsula. And then even now we have some tropical storm watches up for the Georgia and South Carolina coast as that storm, as Debby moves potentially back over water. It'll probably still have tropical storm strength by the time it moves into that area by Monday and Tuesday. And then looking at some of the tracks from the hurricane models, you can see for the most part they are all showing a landfall to the east of Apalachicola and to the west of Cedar Key, Florida. And then beyond that, once we get into Monday and Tuesday, you can see they're kind of all over the place near the Georgia and Florida coast, or excuse me, the Georgia and South Carolina coast. They have it meander. Some of the models even try to bring it way back westward into Georgia, even Alabama or Tennessee. I think that's less likely. You can see the majority of them actually do continue it on a northeastward track beyond after it finishes that loop or stall, and continues it up the east coast into Virginia and then off the coast of the mid-Atlantic and southern New England. And then as for strength, you can see the majority of models keep it at tropical storm strength for its entire duration. Perhaps maybe a low-end Category 1 hurricane possible. Now the latest HWRF hurricane model, which is usually considered the most accurate hurricane model we have, this is a few hours old. The 12-day run should be coming out soon, but as of now, early on August 4th, the HWRF has it landfalling near Apalachicola or to the east of Apalachicola as either a strong tropical storm or a low-end Category 1 hurricane overnight tonight in the 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. potentially time range, very early on Monday morning. And then beyond that, the HWRF actually continues into Georgia. but like I said, the models are all over the place. I think this is actually a little bit too far west, but I could be wrong. The HWRF could be correct. Maybe it will go into southern Georgia. The majority of models do show we're going over to the east, towards southeastern Georgia, and into the Carolina coast. And then another hurricane model we have that's pretty reliable is the HAFS A. And what that is showing is it's also showing a landfall also near Apalachicola to the east. To the east of Apalachicola as a strong tropical storm in the same time frame in that 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. range tonight, overnight tonight, or very early on Monday morning. Now, I want to quickly show you the water temperatures across the eastern Gulf because they are absolutely boiling, or relatively speaking. We got water temperatures across the eastern Gulf of Mexico as high as 88 degrees Fahrenheit, or that would be about 31 to 32 degrees Celsius. Easily supportive of a major hurricane, but like I said, the wind shear and the dry air will likely inhibit that. And actually, these water temperatures are well above average for this area, about 3 to 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit above average. And in terms of Celsius, that's about 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius above average. So the Gulf of Mexico is well above average in terms of water temperature at this time. And then looking at the Atlantic as a whole. The whole Atlantic, North Atlantic, is pretty much above average at this point. Well above average there to the far north, actually. And in terms of actual temperature, getting close to around 29 degrees Celsius for the majority of the Atlantic basin, or about 85 to 87 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, anyway, let me go show you the weather models. Just look at some of the future radar and precip amounts, and also the wind. So the only high resolution model I'm going to be looking at today, just to save time, is the HRRR model. It usually does a very good job at all this convective setup. It's not a hurricane model, so the track might not be accurate, but it gives a very good idea about what could happen over the next few days. So starting off this morning, we have the rain bands already moving into portions of the western Florida peninsula, already impacting Tampa at this time. Even have some tornado warnings up for this area. That's going to be a big concern on the eastern side, is the tornado potential when you have that high wind shear at the low levels along with the high helicity values. But anyway, going into this afternoon, you can see the entire Florida peninsula, basically from Fort Myers northward, starts to get engulfed in these outer rain bands. These could easily produce quick spin-ups of tornadoes. Into tonight, these quickly start pushing up into portions of Georgia, while we still start to get some heavy rain from the core of the system starts to move into the Big Bend area. Sorry, excuse me. And then going into tonight, as the core of that system starts to move in, the Big Bend area, like I said, extremely heavy rainfall possible. Looks like we could start to get a feeder band that moves into the Tampa Bay region, bringing some enhanced rainfall into that area. Flash flooding easily possible in these outer rain bands, along with that tornado potential. And also these outer rain bands do carry a quick burst of high wind gusts possible with these. And then overnight tonight, on the HRRR shows it making landfall in the Big Bend, similar to what the other hurricane models are saying. And huge amounts of rain in the core of that system across northern Florida, and then still getting potentially some outer rain bands into portions of central Florida, easily showing some pretty strong cells. The model is showing could get some tornado potential still in the Tampa and Orlando area today, or excuse me, this would be early tomorrow morning on Monday, August 5th. And then we start to get some of those rain bands to push into portions of coastal Georgia and even South Carolina tomorrow morning. And then going into tomorrow afternoon, the core of that system moving into portions of Georgia with very heavy rainfall, southern Georgia, I should say. And then still getting these rain bands to move across central Florida tomorrow, as those rain bands try to wrap around into the system. Could easily still get a tornado potential out of this across central Florida tomorrow. And as these rain bands push into the Georgia and Carolina coast tomorrow afternoon, could get a tornado threat out. Could get a tornado threat there too, out of this. And then going into tomorrow night, the core of the system starts to move into southeastern portions of Georgia. Still getting some rain bands in central Florida, bringing up tornado potential there, and also into portions of South Carolina. Going into the overnight hours and very, very early into Tuesday morning on August 6th. The core of the system moving into South Carolina at this time, showing very strong cells possible still. Now, the models are all over the place, so I don't think the radar will look exactly like this by Tuesday, but the general idea is very heavy rainfall for portions of the Carolina coast, South Carolina coast by Tuesday morning, and could easily get some embedded tornadoes out of these rain bands too. Going into Tuesday morning. This is as far as the model cycle goes. Easily just looking at this, this would bring very extremely heavy rainfall to South Carolina on Tuesday morning. And the model is still showing those rain bands wrapping in across Florida, central Florida like that. So we could still be getting some rain bands across central Florida even into Tuesday, bringing a tornado potential possibly for central Florida on Tuesday, and going into portions of the South Carolina coast on Tuesday also. Now, this is as far as the model cycle goes, but beyond this, Tuesday afternoon and even into Wednesday, the tornado potential would continue going up the South Carolina coast and then eventually into North Carolina. Now, next I want to look at wind gusts. Now, like I said, this isn't a hurricane model, so this might not be completely accurate, but looking at wind gusts today into tonight, could easily get gusts over 50 to 60 miles an hour there, and across the western peninsula of Florida. Tampa Bay could actually get wind gusts over 70 miles per hour tonight, as they'll be in a pretty good spot to get that onshore wind right across the bay. And then going into tonight, closer to landfall, the entire Big Bend area, as that core of the system starts to move in, will easily bring wind gusts in the 70 to perhaps 90 mile per hour range, right where the eye wall of Debby will occur. And then going into the early tomorrow morning, I'm easily getting gusts still over 70 miles per hour in the core of that storm in northern Florida, and then pushing into southern Georgia. Otherwise, much of the Florida peninsula from Fort Myers northward to Orlando and northward, easily getting gusts over 50 miles per hour still, especially if you get into one of those stronger cells within the outer rain bands. That's when you have the strongest wind gusts. Going into tomorrow afternoon, easily still getting wind gusts in the 50 to 60 mile per hour range in the core of Debby, into northern Florida, southern Georgia. Going into tomorrow night, more of the same if you're near the core of that storm in southern Georgia. Pushing into South Carolina, 50 to 60 mile per hour wind gusts possible, especially once we get into Tuesday morning, where we start getting that onshore wind into coastal South Carolina. I expect wind gusts in the 50 to 70 miles per hour range in this area here. This would include places like Charleston, South Carolina, going into Tuesday morning. And like I said, this is as far as it goes Tuesday morning, but I would expect this to continue much of Tuesday and then eventually into Wednesday, going into the North Carolina coast. Depending how quickly the storm starts to move to the northeast, Tuesday and Wednesday, it's still a bit iffy at this time how fast the storm starts to move northeast. Now, looking at rainfall amounts through Tuesday morning, we have at least 4 inches of rain expected, basically from Fort Myers and Orlando northward through the rest of the Florida peninsula and into portions of southeastern Georgia and South Carolina. Now, I will say that there will be a lot more coming for South Carolina because as the storm stalls, because this only goes out till Tuesday morning, but there will be a lot more rain expected on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, which I will show in a moment. But through Tuesday morning, huge amounts of rainfall for much of the northern half of the Florida peninsula, basically in the 5 to even close to a foot of rainfall. I would expect flooding possible in this area of northern Florida, central and northern Florida, and even going into portions of southeastern Georgia through Tuesday with these types of rainfall numbers. that's when flash flooding will be a major concern for this area. Perhaps even more so. Perhaps even more so than the wind, as this storm might only be a strong tropical storm or a low-end Category 1 hurricane, unless you're near the center of the storm where the wind will be a problem as well. And then quickly looking at the tornadic side of this, looking at the shear values here, very high across Florida there with those purple colors. Going into tonight, much of Florida getting very high shear, even getting into, with those yellow colors there, getting into over 50 knots of low-level shear there in northern Florida. And then going into tomorrow, still high values across much of Florida, going into Georgia and South Carolina. That'll help with the tornado threat in that area. And then also looking at the helicity, or how much spin we have in the low levels of the atmosphere to produce rotating updrafts. Notice how much of Florida has high helicity values today, extremely high tonight actually there across northern Florida. Going into tomorrow, very high values start to push into portions of southern Georgia, and then eventually into South Carolina on Tuesday. And still Tuesday, like I said, still getting some decently high helicity values there in Florida. So those outer rain bands could still produce some tornadoes there across central Florida on Tuesday. And then so looking at the helicity tracks through Tuesday morning, where we have rotation tracks, much of the Florida peninsula and into the coastal Georgia and South Carolina is where we have the majority of these helicity tracks, where we have spin with these storms. This is where the best tornado potential will be through at least Tuesday morning. It will continue beyond this. Like I said, this is just as far as the model cycle goes. Now looking at the total rainfall amounts going out through Saturday, August 10th. This is from the National Blend of Models, which is basically like all of the weather models put together. It's showing a very grim picture for the southeastern coast, especially from like Savannah, Georgia, up to Charleston, South Carolina. It's showing rainfall amounts getting close to 20 inches. This would be extremely concerning. I usually never hype the weather, but I am actually very concerned about some extreme flash flooding, maybe even some historic flash flooding in this area. I hope it doesn't happen like this, but this has me very concerned when you see rainfall amounts in the 15 to 20 inch range. And some weather models are even showing more than that. So, like I said, that has me extremely concerned about some historic flash flooding in this area. And basically from northern Florida all the way to South Carolina, rainfall amounts are expected to be over 7 to 10 inches. So this whole area is in a pretty high risk of flash flooding. But like I said, from coastal Georgia up to like the central northern coast of South Carolina, this is where we could be talking about some potentially historic or near all-time record flooding. Now, the all-time record for South Carolina and North Carolina is from Hurricane Florence in 2018, when that produced up to about 25 to 30 inches of rainfall. So it might not be quite as bad as that, but this could still be extremely dangerous flash flooding possible in this area. Now, moving northward to the mid-Atlantic and northeast coast, I want to show you the rest of the Tropical Storm Debby's future path. We'll be looking at the European model for this. And starting off on Tuesday on August 6th, as the center of Debby starts to move to the northeast along the South Carolina coast. The European model at the moment has it staying offshore until about early on Thursday morning, where it makes a second landfall near Myrtle Beach. But like I said, this is so far in the future, and every time a system stalls out like this, the paths tend to change quite drastically. So don't get too caught up on where the exact landfall will occur at this moment going into Wednesday and Thursday, if it even goes over the water. Some models aren't even showing that. But in general, by the end of the week, the system will start to move to the northeast, bringing the heavy rainfall and the high winds with it. The winds won't be as bad as they will be in Florida, obviously, but could still be pretty gusty in this area. Going into Friday and then going into Saturday. Let me go back a bit. As the system will move back offshore by Friday and Saturday, bringing the core of that rainfall with it. But the mid-Atlantic and into the coastal mid-Atlantic, I should say, and going into southern New England, could still get some pretty heavy rainfall out of this. And then, but first, I want to show you some of the wind gusts from the European model. This is starting on Wednesday afternoon, going into Thursday morning. Wind gusts in the 50 to 65 mile per hour range. That's showing across portions of South Carolina and into coastal North Carolina and near the core of that system, a little further inland. Going into Friday, highest winds along the North Carolina coast into the Virginia coast, getting up to 50 miles per hour. And in the core of that system, in the 30 to 40 mile per hour range. But then going into Saturday, as the core starts to move back offshore, could get some stronger wind gusts along the Delmarva coast into New Jersey. Also Long Island, getting wind gusts up to 50 miles per hour possible. Inland areas could get wind gusts up to about 30 to 40 miles per hour, while coastal areas could easily get gusts close to 50. This is going into Saturday. And like I said, this is still days away, so this could still change. But as of now, this is what it's showing. Going into Sunday, I'm easily getting gusts up to 50 miles per hour still. Along the Cape Cod, in areas like Cape Cod and also Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, before the system quickly starts to move away. And then rainfall amounts through the weekend are still very high from the mid-Atlantic to southern New England. Basically 4 to 7 inches still possible in this area from Virginia to southern New England. Even getting close to 8 inches potentially there in New Jersey and Long Island. It might be a little bit overdone, but a lot of the models are showing at least 5 inches in this area. Some of this is actually from a cold front in the middle of the week. Could get an inch out of that for the mid-Atlantic and southern New England. And then on top of that, they'll get the remnants of Debby as it moves through. So all in all, a good 4 to 7 inches possible in this area means that we could easily be talking about flooding in this area too. So that'll be a concern as well for the mid-Atlantic and southern New England, along with some gusty winds as well for the coastal areas especially. So we got to be keeping an eye out for that. It's not just the southeast that's got to deal with it. Obviously, they'll get it worse with the wind and the rain, but can't rule out some potentially damaging impacts from the mid-Atlantic into southern New England out of this too. And with that being said, that's all I have for today. I hope everyone stays safe with this storm, and I'll see you next time, guys. Have a good one.